Hey, you welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be zeroing in on something that's pretty relevant, I think, to a growing number of couples out there, cohabitation. And no, we're not just talking about, splitting the rent, but like really digging into what it means for a relationship to share the same living space before making that like big commitment.
Yeah, it's really interesting how cohabitation has kind of evolved over time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's this whole mix of like societal changes and financial practicality, and just a way for modern couples to kind of test their compatibility at a deeper level, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely not like our grandparents' idea of like shacking up or whatever they
Yeah.
used to say. But I'm curious, like, what kind of trends are we actually seeing these days in terms of just how common cohabitation is?
Well, studies show that cohabitation rates have actually like skyrocketed in recent decades.
Hmm.
I think in many Western countries now, it's more common for couples to live together before marriage than not, which is interesting. And, the reasons for this are, I mean, they're varied, but it's pretty clear that like cohabitation isn't really seen as taboo anymore. It's more like a normal stage in a lot of relationships these days.
That makes sense. It's like before you like fully merge your lives together, it's smart to maybe do a trial run just to see how you handle those like everyday moments, the good, the bad, and the like, wait, who left the dishes in the sink again?
Exactly. It's about kind of peeling back those layers of, date night courtesy and really seeing if your lifestyles actually mesh when you're dealing with like shared spaces and routines and all those little quirks that you only discover when you're around someone basically 24/7.
Totally. It's like that moment when you realize your partner has this very specific way of loading the dishwasher, or like their definition of clean is like wildly different from yours. Things you probably wouldn't think about on a normal dinner date.
Right? And while these things might seem kind of like minor details, they can actually turn into major sources of tension if you don't address them head on.
And that's where the real learning curve of cohabitation comes in, right? It's not just about sharing an address, but about learning how to communicate effectively and setting boundaries and maybe even like confronting those unspoken expectations that we kind of all bring into relationships without even realizing it.
Yeah, cohabitation can be a crash course in communication and compromise because it forces couples to have those sometimes uncomfortable but very necessary conversations about how they actually want to function as a team.
So it's about way more than just deciding whose turn it is to take out the trash.
Mm,
We're talking about really understanding each other's needs and respecting boundaries and even creating a shared vision for how you want your life to work together.
absolutely. It's about those bigger picture conversations, finances, household responsibilities, personal space, even how you see your future as a couple. These are all things that often get kind of glossed over in those early stages of dating, but they become very real very quickly when you're sharing a living space.
It's interesting, though, because even though there are some definite perks to sharing a life, think of like all the financial advantages. It seems like cohabitation also comes with its own unique set of challenges. It's not always smooth sailing, is it?
It's definitely not always smooth sailing.
Yeah.
You're right about that. It's like any big step you take in a relationship. Cohabitation comes with its own like hurdles and challenges. But I think what's so interesting is that those challenges often come from the same things that make living together so great in the first place.
Right.
Like being in such close proximity and
Yeah.
kind of blending your lives together like that.
It's like all those things that seem really small at first. Like having different sleep schedules or having totally different ideas about what clean actually means, or even just like how much time you need to yourself to recharge. Suddenly, those things can become major issues when you're living under the same roof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why communication is so incredibly important in these relationships where you're living together. And I'm not talking about just like talking at each other. It's about really listening to your partner and trying to see things from their perspective and then finding ways to compromise.
So it's not enough to just like vent your frustrations when you find your partner's gym socks on the kitchen floor for the 100th time.
Probably not.
Mm.
It's more about finding ways to like address those small annoyances before they become huge blowouts. One thing that I think can be really helpful is if you actually schedule regular check-ins with each other, kind of like relationship pit stops, where you can talk openly and honestly about what's working, what's not working, and just air out any frustrations or concerns you have, kind of like a safe space for complaints.
Ooh, I like that. Like a designated time for open communication where you can bring up things that might normally lead to an argument.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually research that supports this. Studies show that couples who have these regular structured communication times, whether it's a weekly check-in or even just setting aside some time each day to connect, they tend to be happier in their relationships and better able to work through disagreements.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating that space for dialogue where both people feel heard and respected. even when you don't see eye to eye on things.
Yes, exactly. And creating that safe space also means setting some clear boundaries, which is super important when you go from seeing each other a few nights a week to basically sharing every aspect of your lives.
Boundaries are interesting, though, because I think a lot of people see them as a way of like shutting people out, when it's actually more about setting up healthy rules so that the relationship can actually grow. So when we're talking about cohabitation, what kind of boundaries are we really talking about?
It can be really simple things, like maybe one person needs quiet time in their home office after work to decompress, while the other person really loves to be social and chatty after a long day. Or it could be about setting expectations around money or chores, or even how you handle social events as a couple.
I bet those conversations can be pretty eye-opening, especially when you start to realize that you have all these expectations you didn't even know you had. Like one person just assumes they'll be the one cooking all the meals, and the other person expects it to be more of an equal split.
Yeah, and that's why those early conversations about your values and your expectations, like how you actually see your lives working together, those are so important to have.
It's almost like you're making a roadmap for your life together, right? But instead of cities and highways, you're kind of mapping out all the places where you might run into misunderstandings or have like big arguments. And I guess with any good roadmap, though, you got to be willing to make changes along the way as you both learn and grow.
For sure. In fact, I think that's one of the best things about cohabitating. You get this time to really discover things, both about yourself and about your partner. You learn about their little habits and what they like and don't like, and just like all those little quirks that you probably wouldn't even think about when you're just dating. But it also helps you figure out more about yourself, too, like how you deal with conflict or how good you are at actually saying what you need, and even just how adaptable you are when it comes to sharing your life with somebody.
It's like holding up a mirror to yourself in a way, right? Which can be exciting, but also kind of scary at the same time. But at the end of the day, isn't it worth it to like truly understand yourself and your partner, whether you end up getting married or living together forever, or even just deciding to go your separate ways?
Yeah, you're totally right. It's not like living together means you're automatically going to have a perfect marriage or anything, but it definitely gives you a lot of really valuable insight and tools that you can use in any long-term relationship. All those skills that we talked about, like communication and compromise and setting boundaries, those are things that will help you in any close relationship.
It's like you're becoming fluent in the
Mm.
language of relationships, right? And that's something that's going to serve you well no matter what.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from like all the ways that society views cohabitation to even some practical tips for making it work. But I think it really all comes down to being open and honest with each other and just being willing to put in the effort.
I totally agree. Living together isn't like this magic solution to all your relationship problems, but it can really help you grow closer together and understand each other better and just build a solid foundation for whatever your future holds together. Well said. Okay, so as we wrap up, here's a little something for you to think about. If you could go back in time and give your younger self just one piece of advice about cohabitating, what would it be? Think about it. Maybe even chat about it with your partner. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cohabitation. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, and we'll see you on the flip side.